So, October is over and it's time for the video critique of the monthly theme submissions. My name is Stephen Kirsting, and as always, this is the system I'm going to use to provide the critique. The first criteria is, does it fit the theme? This month's theme was the egg. You could smash it, crack it, boil it, fry it, whatever you wanted to do, and it didn't even have to be an actual egg. It just had to represent an egg. And all the submitted images do meet the theme requirements. Second consideration is artistic and aesthetic considerations, and those are artistry, what it took effort and skill it was required in creating the image, and aesthetic considerations are pretty much how I feel about the image, connection, composition, things like that. The third consideration are technical considerations, and those are things like focus, depth of field, tripod for shutter speed, those kind of things. Grading criteria is going to be A, I wish I had taken that picture. B, I would be very happy with that picture. C, I probably would not keep the picture. And then D is if there was something technically wrong that spoiled the image. Alright, beginning the critique. First image we have is mine, and it was taken using a D810 with a 70mm lens, stopped down to f11, 1/10 of a second on a tripod, base ISO of 64. So there's pretty much nothing I could have done better, except possibly not have stopped down as far as f11, because f11 is into diffraction limiting for the D810. f8's about the limit there. And if we look closely at the image, there really is very little that is exceptionally sharp. And you know, that was a 24-70 f2.8 lens. One of Nikon's better lenses. There's really no reason it shouldn't be tack sharp somewhere. And so this slight softness of detail in this area is probably due to diffraction. And I chose to accept some diffraction in order to get some sense of depth of field. And even at that, if we look at the center of the image, there really isn't anything that's terribly sharp. So I think if I wanted to get really critical with this image, focus stacking, you know, taking multiple images and then combining them for focus at a little wider aperture, a little sharper aperture, might have been a better choice. This image was taken with what's known as dark field backlighting, which is essentially just rim lighting from the sides with a black background. And so the light hits the edges and wraps around to the front. And it's a pretty simple technique. It creates a very interesting lighting characteristics, and if you have a transparent or translucent object, it can really bring out a lot of details in that object. Let me change something here. Let's go to fit. Alright. Okay, so now we can see all of it. Alright, so all in all, I took this image, composed it this way, lit it this way, because the brown egg made me think of the recent blood red supermoon eclipse, and it just made me think to try to replicate it using the brown egg. So I'm pretty happy with the image overall. I would give it a B, and if I wanted to put this in the A category, I think I would have to do the focus stacking. Alright, the next image is by Carol, and we have a cracked brown egg on a plate. Settings wise, we have ISO 200, which I know is the base ISO for that camera, 1/80th of a second at f8, 23mm, probably handheld. There's no reason why it shouldn't have been, and the image is very sharp. so I don't see where it's caused any issues. I have a little funny characteristic here of the out of focus sections, a bit noisy, a little grainy. And the light, a little on the hard side, not very dramatic as far as the lighting goes. Frontal, we've got a little catch light here on the rim of the plate. It shows here is a little bit distracting, and here a little bit distracting. And overall, for this image, I don't know, I don't connect with this image. I don't know what it's saying or doing. For me, this image is a C as it is. I kind of just don't know why it was taken this way. Let's take a look at the noise, and here's a little trick that we can activate the spot removal tool, and down here at the bottom there's this thing called visualize spots, and we can turn that up to where we can see the noise in the background and on the edges. We can go down to the detail tab, and it will actually show, as I adjust the noise level, it will actually show me what's being removed out of the background, and then we can turn that back off. So I'm using the clone, the patch tool up here with visualize spots to help me with noise removal, and we've gotten rid of quite a bit of the noise in there, and without really sacrificing much on the finer details in this area. So that's something I would probably do with this image. As I said, I don't see any problem with any of the settings, but just contextually, aesthetically, this image is a C for me. Another image by Carol. ISO is rather high this time for a still life. Really not a reason to do that. Obviously, we were getting away with hand holding, 23mm. Went to the rule of thumb, shutter speed about equal to focal length, and had to use ISO to do so, and an f2.8, which means the lens is pretty much wide open. So that result here is we've got a shallow depth of field, a little noisier characteristics due to the higher ISO. It looks like sharpening may have been applied because a lot of the noise is right on the edges. That's a kind of characteristic of heavy sharpening. And don't really have anything in particularly great focus. So my general personal guideline is if I'm hand holding, I want the shutter speed to be at least twice the focal length, 3 times if I can get it, if you really want to get something very sharp. In this case, I think there's really no reason this couldn't have been done with a tripod. Aesthetically, I connect with this image a lot more. I like the checkerboard background, the tablecloth, the white eggs, the light. I find the lighting is, a little on the harsh side, but in this image, to me, that conveys a bright, sunny morning, light coming through the window, and a homey kind of a breakfast thing going on. Would you necessarily crack eggs and throw them on the tablecloth? Probably not. Would they be that clean? Probably not. Perhaps a little messier and on a small white plate with a looser composition to keep the tablecloth might have been a little more realistic, I guess. But emotionally, I connect with this image more than the first. It's a happy breakfast, you know, Sunday morning breakfast kind of feeling to me. Technically, again, due to some of these issues as far as focus and settings goes, I'm going to have to give this one a C minus to a D. I think this could have easily been corrected as far as, you know, context and concept. I would go C plus B on this image. Next image is by Adrian, and we have a brown egg on forks, and this is, you know, come to be something of a classic image, the egg on the two forks crossed, and kudos for going for it. Just because it's been done doesn't mean you've done it, and doesn't mean you can't do it better. However, the first thing that strikes me with this image is the lighting. It's quite harsh. We've got a hard specular light going on here. We've got hard speculars reflecting off the forks onto the egg, and then some fairly hard lighting of the fork itself, and resulting hard shadows. So really my first critique there is it needs softer light, a much larger light closer, in my opinion. Next thing I noticed right offhand is the banding in the background, and I'm not going to be able to do anything about that with a JPEG, and it may not be fixable in a raw file if it's actually there in the raw file, but I'm guessing at least a certain amount of that is added through post-production. If we look at the settings, ISO is around 100, is at 155, stop down to f8, 1.6. I'm guessing a tripod because you wouldn't have gotten away with it otherwise. Then it should be plenty sharp at f8, and I don't see a lot of issues. It's not terribly sharp, and there's a lot of noise in this image. A lot of noise in the background, in the colors, and this is ISO noise largely. This funny texture that's arisen in there could be a sensor characteristic, but it's usually a combination of sharpening and noise reduction simultaneous, something like that. Again, we can kind of turn on the spots here, see all the noise in the background, and we can kill that. And we will be sacrificing some detail in doing so. Turn that off. We sacrifice a little bit of detail, but it cleans up the image a lot. The image seems oversaturated to me as well. Very orange for a brown egg. Let's see. Let's take a look in here. We'll step back. Get rid of all that luminance smoothing. So we did lose a bit of detail. It's a trade-off. Banding, gamma, I have to guess that at least some of that is due to sharpening, post-processing, adjusting the exposure, and all monitors have trouble in the deep darks with this kind of a thing. So you have to, if you want a black gradient background, you really have to capture it well in the camera using minimum ISO in order to minimize these kind of issues. And even if there is no problem in the image itself, depending upon your monitor calibration, you may still see some banding in the darks. If you look up here on this test image I have, and you look real carefully, I've got real nice gradients all the way through, except for this step right here from dark gray to black is pretty abrupt. I mean, it's still a gradient, but it's nothing like it is over here. It's not as smooth. It's pretty hard step, which means my monitor, freshly calibrated, has a little bit of problem in these dark transitions from dark gray to black, and there's nothing I can do about that. So I can see banding on these images that may actually not be in the image, and you may have the same issue. Or more likely, if your monitor is not calibrated well, you will have most of this going straight to black and you won't see any banding at all, because all of this range your monitor shows as black, which is actually a worst case scenario. Alright, so back to the image. I give it a C to C minus. Big issue is the lighting and the post-treatment with the banding and the saturation. That saturation is way heavy for me. Turn that way down. Vibrance. Bring some of that back up. Turn the vibrance way down. You notice that banding cleans up a bit. And if we were to go over to soft proofing, and let's change this to an sRG. You can see we've got these saturation clipping. And if I were to go back here to there and check on that, you can see all that saturation clipping going on. And that's in the sRGB. If we were to go to a print, we wanted to print this on an art paper, it gets even worse. Alright, so definitely soft proofing is something to pay attention to, and notice that the vibrance settings affect that heavily. So kudos on making the attempt. Softer lighting and less heavy processing would have helped this image quite a bit, in my opinion. Here we have an image by Glenn, and kind of a similar take to the image I did. Here we have a, to me anyways, it seems to be something of a crescent moon in the black background, and I like the idea. It's gone to a little bit of abstract where we don't see the entire egg, and I like that. There's enough there that I know it's an egg, or I could determine that it's an egg, and that provides a little bit of interest in the image. In this image I don't see a lot of banding issues. Lighting's a little bit on the hard side due to the specular here, and I'm guessing that the black point was adjusted pretty heavily in this image due to how hard the line is here, and maybe it was painted in because it hasn't affected over in this area as much. I would expect these dots, the black points, to be just about as black. It's a little heavier over in this area, so maybe it was painted in. I don't know, but it was created with post manipulation as opposed to actual lighting, and that affects it a bit. It's gotten, you know, a bit noisy, hard, unnatural kind of a transition from our nice gradients over here to our black. Now, to get that type of transition naturally, you would have to get your light source very, very close to the egg. It might only be, 1 inch away over here, so that it has to be turned down so much so as not to blow this side out, that this distance causes the light to fall off 2 stops. If it's 1 inch away here, 2 inches going this direction is 2 stops of light fall off over that short distance. And with an image like this, you can do that, and I would actually recommend doing that. Compose this image as tight as possible on the egg. Take this in portrait orientation. Let me make this portrait orientation, give you an idea. If we took this image in portrait orientation like this, with the light really close to it, we maximize the resolution, the pixels on the subject, which is what we would want, and we can add all the background we want. So you get a much higher resolution, a much larger file, and we could have that light source right next to the egg, even within the field of view, and just crop it out and throw background in there as we wanted to. For some reason I don't have the information on this image. Well, I know it's because I had to steal it from Flickr as a screen grab, and I forgot to make note of the settings. And the image is small to the point it doesn't enlarge here. This is full size, so I can't really critique settings or the finer technical points, but it does look to me just offhand that this, much like my own image, could have benefited from more depth of field or focus stacking. Overall, I give this image a C+ to B-. Focus stacking, actually lighting it to get this type of fall off, and that's not to say it wouldn't need some help anyways, but we could have got it better. Make this highlight more transparent, translucent, make the gradient more continuous, and create this fall off a little more naturally. And I think this image could be a B to B+, possibly an A if you really like eggs. Alright, next image. This image is by Heather, and we've got the 18 to 55. Oh, that's all the information that's in the image. 18 to 55. I don't know why, that's all I got. Alright, first things first. Well, I like the idea of this image. I really do. I don't think it worked as well as it could have. First thing is, if this candle holder here had been rotated so that this seam or a seam was pointing at the camera along the dividing line of the background, your black and white reversal through the crystal should have worked right along the dividing line. Instead of being over here and then over here with this central portion not having the flip, it actually in effect appears to be more white, which throws it out of balance. So rotating that candlestick should have put your black and white evenly and divided down the center. I like that the image was lit from the right side or right front, because it kind of takes that lighting of the egg to the same idea. Dark on the left, light on the right, contrasting with the background. Again, to do that and get more of a dividing line would require a light source for the egg very close to the egg. And with this, you're probably looking at compositing images. One with the egg lit for the egg, and then another one lit for the background and the candlestick holder, and then compositing those together. We could manipulate that somewhat here. We could take a brush. Let's see where my settings set pretty awful high. But we could take a brush and kind of fake this in if we really wanted to. This would be a lot easier to do in Photoshop. But we could kind of fake it in. Now obviously you'd want to do a better job than I'm doing. And you can also, use the eraser in order to remove some of that. Create a nice hard edge. Like that kind of thing if you really wanted to take the whole idea to the extreme. One thing about, never mind, leave that alone. Turn that off. If we look at the background, you're going to have this with a textured background. You get noise. If it's a black paper background with much light on it at all, the texture will show up as noise. Now some of this, you can see the blocky characteristic here. That's JPEG artifacts. I don't know if this was taken as a JPEG. And you can see we've got a bit of banding. Light gray, dark gray, black. Not really any even transition between them. So that could be post manipulation again of black point, white point, exposure, contrast, all those things can affect it. And to help that might have required more background separation. And in order to do that while keeping the background all the way through the vase, we'd have to put the candlestick and egg on something so the background extended below it, because as farther away it gets, it wants to get higher on the horizon line there. In order to keep it low, we'd actually have to elevate the candlestick, but by getting less light on the background, we might have been able to, or at least to light it separately and throw it more out of focus. We might have been able to minimize some of this in the black background. As you can see from these images, very dark is very demanding of digital, JPEGs particularly. This is a case where using 14-bit files or 12-bit files or whatever the largest color depth your camera is capable of in RAW is beneficial, and the lowest ISO possible is also beneficial to help minimize these issues. And even with all that, you may still see some of this just due to monitor limitations. My computer is a MacBook Pro with a Retina screen. It has 99.8% of the sRGB color space calibrated recently and as well as I can, and I still can have issues sometimes with banding in the very darks. Overall, I give this image a C plus. I'll go with C plus. I think it has B or even A potential. Rotating the candlestick would have made a big difference, I do believe. I'm 99% sure you could have got the black and white flip along the line by rotating that candlestick. And then some lighting, perhaps compositing. Nice job, nice creative idea. Alright, another image, an image by Heather. And again, we've got quite a bit of noise and JPEG artifacts, banding, all of that. And if you don't see any of that on your monitor, then you have a black point and brightness setting issue. You know, I can turn this way down and make all that go away, my brightness setting on my monitor, and most of that banding goes away, right? Or you can a gamma setting or a contrast setting can all affect this kind of stuff. I'm seeing a bit of color noise in the background along with it. And let's see. Let's look at the settings. ISO 400 is going to contribute to some of that, working with those dark gradients. 1/125th at f6, 55 millimeters. Plenty of shutter speed for hand holding. I would assume it was handheld. And I don't know. So these gradients, banding, color noise, and stuff like that. Being that we're working with a JPEG at this point, that you uploaded to Flickr, I probably can't get rid of that. Certainly not entirely. Maybe not even reasonably effectively. Go down here to the detail and let's try color first, because that's actually looks like it's made it noisier. No, it didn't make any difference that I can tell. Let's just crank the luminance up. Alright, we get rid of a lot of it. Let's turn it off, see what that actually did to the image. And so we've gotten rid of a lot of the noise. The gradients are much smoother through this area. We still have a bit over here, and we probably have sacrificed a certain amount of detail in the image itself. We go back here and check. Well, since a lot of the detail is actually coming across as noise, I don't know that getting rid of the noise has actually hurt the image. Alright, settings wise, other than ISO, I don't have a problem. Again, it's a still life. There's no reason not to use a tripod. Use the minimum ISO, accept the longer shutter speed, and probably stop the lens down, because at 55 millimeters, f5.6 is wide open. So too many compromises in order to get away with hand holding that really weren't necessary and have affected the image negatively. When I look at this image, I want the focus to be here on this egg. That's where I want it to be. It's the right 1/3. It's a large area of bright contrast. It draws a lot of attention, and it's where my eye goes to first. After that, I come down here to these smaller broken pieces. And I don't mind these being in focus and these not being in focus. So I think what I would have liked would be a graduation of focus, going from out of focus, stepping in, a little sharper focus to sharp focus, then back out of focus over here. And I wouldn't mind if this image had more depth of field, to where these shells and these shells were both had a reasonable amount of sharpness to them, but I do want the maximum sharpness here on this egg, because as it is, this is about the third place I look for something in this image. It's lower contrast, it's smaller in size, and it's not predominant. It's not in a particularly strong place. It's not particularly large in size. So it's not the first place I look, and nothing actually leads me to it. So I kind of wander around. I look here, I look there, I look there, and eventually get to what's actually in focus. So for to me, the composition, I like the composition, I don't like the focus for the composition as much as I think I could. Alright, so all in all, I have to put this image in the C minus to D range, simply for the aperture, lack of sharpness, depth of field, and the ISO being high, causing noise issues, etc. And without knowing what you did in post, I don't know how much the processing applied to this contributed to some of the noise and stuff that was present and is present in the image. And I probably, while I was at it, I'd get rid of a bunch of these little things down here. These smaller out of focus blurry points, I would get rid of those. That's easy. Easy to do. You don't have to think about it. Yep. Make it completely opaque. Alright. That's weird. Almost seems like I created one. Wonder. Alright, whatever. Okay. Next image. Here we have a picture by MJ, and I really like the novelty of this image. So without looking at anything else, I like this image. I find it humorous. It was titled Quality Control, and I can certainly see that. You can also see trying to pick an egg out of the group that's the rooster's egg. I like that. Looking at the settings, 35mm at 1/60th is plenty. ISO 400. Noisy, F10. Tons of depth of field. I don't know that I necessarily would have gone that far, because F10 is, I'm almost certain, is in diffraction on that camera. ISO 400 is a result of that. In order to get shutter speed, you had more than enough shutter speed, you could have lost a little. Although, assuming the rooster was actually there and actually checking out the eggs, and I have no reason to think it wasn't, you know, need a shutter speed for the moving subject and depth of field to help compensate for the subject position within fore and aft. So I can understand it all. So I guess I won't complain about the settings too much. Now in this image, because there is so much texture, the noise isn't going to convey as much as it would in a solid color type background. So if we look closely, there's noise here in these eggs, but it actually comes across somewhat as detail. It's not, all right, it's noise, but it doesn't convey as noise as strongly. There's a bit in the grass back here. We can see it, and but again, it's not as detracting from the image as it otherwise would be. I don't really see the same level of noise on the rooster, or I don't know, it could be a hen of some kind. It doesn't seem to be as prominent here. Not sure why. And if we look at the image, you know, plenty sharp, plenty of depth of field, maybe more than we needed. Don't really have a problem with that. Let's get over here. Let's kill some of that noise. And so, with just that, I've killed a lot of the noise, but I haven't really affected the perception of sharpness. Maybe a little bit. Let's see. If I use the backslash key, we can switch between the before with the noise in the eggs. I'm looking specifically at the hen's or rooster's eye, the catch light for loss of sharpness, and switch back to the post. A slight loss of sharpness or perceived sharpness on the rooster, but I think overall an improvement as far as that goes. Viewed at smaller sizes and perhaps even printed, you know, I'm looking at these at 1:1, 100% magnification, right? And if this is going to be printed on an inkjet, this amount of noise will largely not be visible, right? Largely not be visible. Now, if you don't want this amount of noise to be visible and you're presenting it on the web, the thing to do is to either clean it up or downsize the image. Because there's the before and there's the after, and at this smaller size it goes away. It's not visible. So if you want to present this on the web and you don't want as much noise, or you want to increase the depth of field for the image, or the apparent depth of field and sharpness for the image, make it smaller. Present it at the size your client, customer, viewer needs and or you want to present it. Right? For our purposes, I do prefer you put them up full size so I can really be nitpicky and tear your images apart. So this image, I'm kind of torn on the camera settings. I can see justification for it because you had a moving subject, the hen in the scene, but it has hurt the image somewhat. Lighting and everything else I don't have a problem with. I like the image overall. So I'll give this image a B. I give this image a B. I like that image. Nice job. Alright, another image by MJ. And I want to like this image. I do like this image. I like the high key aspect to this image. I like the depth of field and the focus where it's at on the cracks and the speckles over here on this front egg. I like that it falls off, but not so much as to be distracting on the back egg here. Lighting's a bit hard and somewhat complicated. I'm not sure exactly. I see what I think is two lights. We've got two shadows here, or a hard step in the shadow, which I think we had a strong light overall. It's a very large light, looks to be soft, but it looks to me as if we have a secondary light to probably backlight this egg and get the cracks to show as they do and stuff. And I'm also saying that because of how it's blown the top edges here, whether it was the spotlight that did it or the secondary light or a combination of the two, or whatever it was. If I have to say there's something I don't like, it's that. It's these top edges having gone complete white, blown out along here as well, making the image harsher than it needs to be in those areas. Other than that, I really don't have a lot of issue with it. The double shadow, perhaps. Now, to fix that, probably you're looking at combining images. One with a backlight for the cracks, this area. I'm assuming that's what was done. and then an overall lighting image for the background and the eggs in this even, flat, softish light with a softer shadow. Alright, looking at the camera settings, 130, f8, ISO 100, 105 millimeter. I don't see an issue with any of those settings. The image looks sharp. There's not any notable noise to this image, so I don't really have an issue with anything as such. You know, yeah, not really. Obviously, a tripod was used, so my biggest critique is the compound lighting and blowing the edges and causing the harder and double shadow. Tell me if I'm wrong on that. Overall, I give this image a B-. Next image we have by Adrian, and I like this image. It's a little bit harsh. It was intended to be. You know, it's not politically correct, and that's the point of the image. And to that aspect, I like it. I like the concept. So, you know, when I talk about, you know, connecting with an image and then I start tearing an image apart, remember that the most important thing is a connection with the image, that it says something, that it conveys something, that it moves the viewer in some way. So no matter what else, this image is successful. Alright, let's look at the camera settings. We've got 1/100th at f5.6 at 167 on a 28 to 300 millimeter lens. I have a 28 to 300, and I'm thinking at 167 5.6 is about wide open, and that lens isn't sharp near wide open ever. You know, I almost never use that lens at something at less than f8, even if it means diffraction, because it's just not crisp. And I imagine we're gonna see that in the image itself. All right, ISO 250. I believe you could have used a lower ISO. You know, we've got quite a bit of noise in this image. We don't have anything, you know, terribly sharp. The noise detracts, it obscures detail that otherwise there. So I don't know. Viewed at full size, and what size is this? 34 by 551. So, you know, so I'm guessing that's nearly a full frame image. I don't know. As far as you know, critical evaluation, the noise is excessive to me. And being that we're in a JPEG state at this point, I'm not going to be able to do a whole lot with it. It cleans up some, you know, contrast settings, clarity settings, black point settings. They can all emphasize that noise, make it worse than it was originally. Looking at the background, you know, that little bit of banding right there, that could easily be my monitor, which kind of just stinks. There's no way of getting around it. Alright, so maximum IQ, you know, nitpicky details, noise is high, sharpness is low, so that definitely hurts the image on a technical basis. I don't know what's going on right there as far as this little blur in the background right there. I probably would clean that out. And I don't know if you can see it on my monitor, but at the smaller size here in the JPEG, I have more banding in the background than I do at a larger size. And that's simply because the gradient is compressed, so a lot of the finer steps are a little harder at a smaller view. Alright, so conceptually, we've got a broken egg. It's been hurt by all the nasty things that's been said to it. It's kind of patched up. Looks terrible. What's happened to it's terrible. What's being said is terrible. Conceptually and image-wise, you know, I give this a B. I think the prop, whatever it's sitting in, you know, a little cup, I don't like that so much. I think it would work better just sitting on, you know, a solid surface. So the background was in like an infinity background, just wrapped around a piece of paper or whatever, as opposed to being in the stand. And there's this stuff called blue tack. It's an adhesive putty. I use that a lot to position things. You can mount it up behind the egg and just under it so you don't see it, to help hold the egg standing up right where you want it. I use that stuff a lot to get away from having to use something like the little cup in this image. Overall, like I said, I'm in a B minus. I think without the cup it'd be B plus conceptually. Execution wise, noise, sharpness, I'm going to have to put it down at the C minus range for that. And for this image, I haven't mentioned it, but this image, being that it's such a stark image and it's meant to be, you know, kind of hard and in your face, the hard lighting in this image I actually think works, as opposed to a lot of the other images where I'm saying they're more studies of form and shape and that kind of thing, where I keep saying, you know, softer lighting, smoother gradients, stuff like that is better. For this image being a hard, in your face kind of idea, I think the hard lighting works. So overall, nice job on that image. Alright, we have an image by Melissa, first time submitter to the themes. And I would like to say I'll be nice, but I would be lying. I'm not nice. Alright, overall, it's an egg. Lighting wise, a little on the hard side. You got a little specular here. A little torn on the texture. Let's take a look at camera settings. Okay, we have ISO 100, 145, f3 on a 4.3 millimeter. And I looked up the camera, and it's a almost 6 crop factor on that sensor. ISO 100, I believe, is right near the bottom. And first thing, so I don't know that you could have done any better settings wise. It is apparent to me that a tripod or some sort of support was used. F3 I think is about max aperture, so it's probably not as sharp as it could have been if you stop down a little bit. Depth of field on a small sensor like that is pretty great in general, but it doesn't compensate for actual sharpness. So I probably would have stopped down and accepted a little longer shutter speed, because you're already, you know, well in the penalty zone on shutter speeds, so a tripod or support was already required. Alright, so we look at this image in detail. A little bit of banding here, color, you know, the background, so it's bled out there. Over here, we've got a nice gradient without banding. Noise really isn't too bad. This back here in the background, we'll get rid of that. Really no reason to leave that. Gone. You know, we could work on some of this in the background. We'll just take that exposure. And you gotta really be careful with this though. We could sit there and we could clean this up, you know, quite a bit. Get rid of a lot of that real quickly. Now again, depending upon your monitor, you may not have even seen it. So it's just another case for calibration. And we also, like I said, have to be real careful that we don't create new problems when we start manipulating that stuff. But it actually looks like it worked pretty well. We didn't create any additional banding. You know, clean that up in that area as well. Just being, you know, more particular. Sharpness, you know, it's not as sharp as it could be. And again, that's going to be the wide open aperture. A little bit of noise in here. I don't know that I would worry about it at this level. We could certainly take it out a little bit without really affecting the details here. If I just step back from remove, so that's without getting rid of the noise, and then this is with getting rid of the majority of the noise. Not much difference over here in the details, while it has made a bit of difference here where the noise was apparent. A little bit of a color cast in this area. So we've got a bit of greenish yellows in here. Let's see what we've got. It's going to say yellow. Oh no, it calls it blue. Alright. So we've got a bit of blue in that area that I don't know where it came from. We can certainly affect that. We can take the luminance. It's kind of affecting the whole image, making it brighter than we want. So luminance, just instead of doing that, will kill the saturation. And that cleans it up a bit. And there's still a little bit of green in there. At least it looks like green to me. With a little more attention to detail, close zoom, we could clean that up a little more, I think. But it looks a little better to me. Alright, execution wise, creative use of a CD to get your mirror and to hold the egg in place. Plus and minus, you've got the hard reflection of this clear area on the disc where they imprint that stuff, because it's not diffused as it is out here. It's creating a hard reflection in that area. I don't think that really helps at all. The ring itself doesn't help the image, in my opinion. So I think something else, not trying for the reflection, because you've got the white, no reflection, you've got the clear, nice reflection, then you've got the diffused reflection with some color stuff going through it, and maybe that's what's contributing to up there. And if we look, because the reflective part of the CD is a film, metal film on the one side, you're actually going to have dual reflection here, and it's not real apparent, but because the plastic surface is somewhat reflective, you get one softer reflection, and then because the metal behind is more reflective, you'll get a secondary clearer reflection. So usually if you're going for a reflection, you want a solid surface, reflective surface, not a mirror, not plastic over top of something, you know, like thick plexiglass or anything like that. Shiny metal, polished stone, something like that. All right. So overall, I'm in the C range for this image. The lighting's not bad. A little harder with the specular here. I'm a little torn on the water drops. They're not significant enough to be obvious, and you know, when we look really close, they're not adding and they're not detracting. Exactly. I don't know if it's condensation. It looks more like condensation. And then you have here where it's been smeared, which doesn't work as well. So overall, I'm going to C on this image, C plus, somewhere around there. And then camera settings, you know, C minus area on those. All right, next image. Another image by Melissa. As if one wasn't enough punishment, you gotta jump right in and go for two. Kudos for that. All right, starting with the camera settings, we have the same settings as before, I believe. We have the same settings. Yep, exactly the same settings, and we're gonna have exactly the same issues. A little more noise in this image than the last. A little bit more color, call it contamination. The greens, yellow, blues, purples showing up in there. Yeah, we can just convert it to black and white, get rid of all that. Or selectively, you know, hue, saturation, luminance to tone those down. The first thing with this image is, well, all the same things as the last image as far as the double reflection, the highlight around the bottom here from the clear ring on the CD. Like I said, creative use of a CD, I just don't think it worked as well as something else might have. Background is just, it's way busy, and you know, with the sensor you have on that camera, you're gonna have a real hard time throwing a background out of focus to minimize busyness like that. And this background was there intentionally, it wasn't in the last image. I just don't think it worked. I don't think making it more out of focus would necessarily help, because it would just make all these specular spots larger and somewhat more distracting. It doesn't work for me. I kind of get the disco ballish idea kind of thing, and you know, maybe if this had been driven hard the other way, it could work in that kind of party specular kind of thing. And in that case, for the background at least, harder light might have helped. You know, throw a lot more speculars, get a lot more of these color refractions in there, to kind of drive it to that disco ball kind of idea. But as it is, you know, it doesn't work as well for me. If you did want to have a background, try to throw it out of focus with the camera you have, the only thing you really can do is separate it from the subject with more distance. That would help throw it out of focus. Like I said, I don't think it would. Out of focus is the answer here. Either, you know, drive it let's see what happens when we just go stupid with this thing and drive the vibrance way up. I don't know about that. Let's get rid of the blue. Make that bright. Yeah, well, okay, that doesn't work for me either. All right, just go back to the original. Overall, you know, I give this image a C. Same issues as the last one, but we've added in the busy, distracting background. I think there's an idea there, disco ball kind of thing. I don't know if I would like it or not. Done better, but I see a concept or an idea behind it, and you know, go for it and take another shot at it and see if you can't drive this into that disco ball idea, if that's what you were going for. Just because I'm not particularly fond of it doesn't mean it's not worth doing. Alright, next image is by Glenn, and I like this image. I like the lighting, backlighting. It may all be backlighting. I'm not entirely certain on that. In this case, I don't mind the blown areas here. I think this might be better, and I'm not going to be able to pull anything out of that, I don't think, from a JPEG. Alright, so I might prefer that toned down a bit, and we can do that selectively with a brush. Go down here and we'll take the highlights way down. Let's first reset all the other settings, then take the highlights way down and see if we can bring that into a little more tolerable range. So it's just not quite as blown. See our warnings still have bits that are clipping, so you know, if it's printed it's going to go to paper white, and if it's on display it'll just be 255, and I really don't mind that too much at all. I like the backlighting. Compositionally, I think it's too tight on the sides. I don't mind that. This is the situation of fill the frame with the subject. It's a still life. There's no concerns about, you know, clipping edges and stuff like that. So get as many pixels on the subject. It's a solid background. We can add more background later for whatever composition we want. So as far as, you know, execution, this composition, this tight, it's a good idea. As far as presentation, to me it's a bit too tight on the sides. I want it a little more balanced. 4 sides, or at least 2 adjoining sides is generally how I do it. I don't know why, but I would normally have 2 adjoining sides balanced and then the other 2 adjoining sides about balanced. Or equidistant, I guess. No settings again. I don't know why I didn't make note of them. But it looks sharp. I don't see any significant noise. So offhand, I don't have any issue with settings either. All in all, a good job to me. This one's bordering on an A for me. I like this image. I would be glad to have executed this image. I'd be happy to have this image. I don't know if I'd hang it on my wall or not, but I might. There's no reason not to if you like eggs. So yeah, I'll give that one an A. That's our first day of the day. Congratulations. Alright, here we have an image by Ross. Again, I stole this from Flickr, And this time I did make note of the settings. This is a K3 Pentax with a 35mm f9, 8-second at ISO 100. Alright, so right off the bat I'm fairly certain a tripod was used. Good job there. I don't see any highlight clippings. I don't have any warnings going on. So the exposure is good. I like the still life. In a way, I like everything but the egg in this image. The light may be a little hard for my taste. A little softer light, so we had a little more texture, a little less lost due to high contrast. The light areas might have showed a little better, but I don't find it overly the hard light overly negative. But the egg itself, I don't know how it fits. You know, I get hot rod, I get garage, I get working or driving gloves. I get a nice, well put together still life, but I don't know how the egg fits. So I'm just kind of lost a little bit. It's a little bit of a miss there for me. I don't see any issues settings wise. Not as sharp as I would think you should be able to get. So maybe depth of field. I don't know that you would stop down any further to help that. I don't know if it's a lens issue, if it's a zoom and it's just not particularly sharp. As a whole, I don't find that it hurts it. But I think, you know, more sharpness certainly couldn't hurt. I don't know what the answer is because I don't know the equipment you used. I don't see anything obviously wrong with the settings, unless, yeah, you didn't get away with 8 seconds hand holding. I don't care if you had VR or not. So the only thing I can come up with offhand with the settings you used in the situation would be focus stacking. But, you know, I'm not seeing misfocus. Yeah, I'm not really seeing misfocus. I'm not seeing anything that's really particularly sharp, so I don't know, you know, focus stacking is going to help it either. I'm a little bit of a loss on that one. Overall, like I said, conceptually, image-wise, overall, it's well put together, well executed. A little harsh on the lighting for me, and I don't quite get the egg in this still life. So, you know, C+, B- range for me. Alright, here we have one by Ian, and I finally pronounced your name correctly after you've told me 3 or 4 times. Sorry about that. Alright, Pentax K200 with a 50mm set at f4, 1/100th of a second at ISO 400. So right off the bat, ISO's high, probably trying to get away with hand holding for a still life. No reason to do it. And it doesn't matter what camera you have or how good an ISO performance it has, its best performance is going to be at minimum ISO. You know, if you want the dynamic range, you want the color sensitivity, you want the tonality, which is a tonality rating that a camera has. If you've got 10 stops of dynamic range with 10 bits of tonality, the tonality is the accuracy of the information within the 10 stops of dynamic range. Because you could have, you know, 10 stops of dynamic range with 3 bits of sensitivity. You know, you get black, middle gray, and white, and that would be pretty crappy. And that's what happens as you drive to higher ISOs. The tonality of capability of the sensor goes down. So these bandings and gradients and stuff like that, along with noise and everything else, color sensitivity, it all takes a dive, even on, you know, the best cameras. So, you know, still lifes, there's just no reason to do it. If you don't have a tripod, find another solution and invest in a tripod. All right, that's all I can say. I hate them, I don't like them, I don't like using them, but I own several. And you should own one too. All right. Right off the bat, I've got banding, got a bit of noise. You know, some of this I think was probably introduced with manipulation because of how granular it is. So I'm thinking black point, white point. And again, some of this stuff will be less apparent on a lesser monitor with poor calibration. You may not see it at all, and I don't actually know if you can see it looking at a video of my screen. I don't think you will. So if you're not seeing what I'm talking about, take my word for it. It's there. All right. A lot of noise. You know, a lot of this, you could clean it up if you really wanted to an extent. You're not going to get rid of all of it. Not really sharp. It's not bad. You know, right in this area, it seems to have decent sharpness. A bit under. I don't know if it was taken under, but with an image like this, you're generally going to be better saturating the image, saturating the sensor, meaning pushing the exposure to the right side in order to collect as much light information for the sensor, and then pulling it back down. You're not going to have any more tones. You know, you don't get more detail or tones by doing that, but you get more color information by collecting more light. It's going to be more accurate, and using base ISO is going to allow that to help that as well. So with an image like this, even if you want it to be on the darker side, you may very well be better exposing it more normally or brighter and then pulling it back down, because as you do so, you just have more information to work with as far as having saturated the sensor, which is, you know, it's one of those keys to image quality, is collecting as much light as you possibly can. All right, so overall, I don't know, for me this is a C minus. I'm not sure about the red. I don't like the way the red is splotchy on the egg itself. As far as the background goes, I'm okay with it. Maybe this was a attempt at split toning, in which case I think it's probably a bit heavy-handed and could be toned down quite a bit. And if I go to, let's take saturation down. I don't know. Working with JPEGs is just, it's hard. Maybe that's a little better. I'm not overly taken with it. I kind of like it, the more uniformity of the original. So at least on my monitor, for me, this image is, like I said, a C- range. Next image by Ian, and this image is gone the other way. I don't remember it being this flat on Flickr, and that would mean more than likely a color space issue. I'm half tempted. Actually, let me go over. Never mind, I'm not going to do it. But if it doesn't look this flat on your monitor, then, or on Flickr, then there's a color space issue going on. Alright, so right off the bat, gradient and lighting and stuff, I think this is good. You got nice soft light. We don't have any specular highlights. We got nice gradient going off the shadow here. You know, I think I would prefer a little more frontal, you know, maybe 3/4 area, so we don't have as much in dark shadow here. In this image, yeah, I'm not going to be able to do much with this image, being that it's in a JPEG. There's not a lot I'm going to be able to do. Exposure's just off, or the color space or something. It's way flat, very gray, rather monotone. It needs more contrast. It needs a better black point. And to fix this at this point with the JPEG it'd be, I don't think it's even doable in Photoshop with a lot of painting and stuff like that. We could certainly improve it, but I don't think it's worth the effort. But I'm suspecting that this image, that there was an issue in the uploading to Flickr and me copying it with a screen grab, that some of these issues aren't actually inherent in the image itself as taken. So I would definitely look at that. Lighting wise, you know, I like it, but as I'm seeing it here, it's a fail. And you know, C-D range. And again, ISO, don't do it if you don't have to. Alright, I guess that's it for images this month. Well, it seems a lot of you made it hard on yourselves by going for the dark image. Very demanding of technique, camera settings, monitor calibration, everything. And much respect for doing that. You know, these assignments aren't just about knocking it out of the park. You know, that's nice, it's great, but if you could do all these assignments and knock it out of the park without trying, it'd almost be pointless to do so. A lot of this is to provide a challenge and to fail, because it's through our failures and attempts that we learn the most. So kudos for making it hard on yourselves and failing where you failed, and kudos to those of you who succeeded. As always, I hope you've taken my comments as intended. It's mostly just my opinion, and if you disagree with me, well, that's fine. I'm cool with that. Until next time, I'll see you then.